Good afternoon. My name is Mariam Ankeldi, graduate in Law and International Relations from IE University and legal advisor. Today, I am going to talk about the Digital Markets Act under the definition of platform governance in the European Union. Introduction. The Digital Markets Act, also known as the DMA, is a landmark piece of European Union legislation designed to ensure fairness in the digital economy. It targets large online platforms that act as gatekeepers, companies with significant market power that can control access between businesses and users. Unlike traditional antitrust law, which intervenes after anti-competitive behavior occurs, the DMA establishes a set of ex-ante obligations that gatekeepers must follow proactively. These include requirements to allow interoperability, for instance, prevent self-preferencing, and ensure transparency in digital advertising and data use. Now let's talk about the objectives and methodology. This research has three main objectives. Firstly, it analyzes the scope and implications of some European Commission's recent decisions against Apple and Meta for violating the DMA, looking at what these rulings mean for the enforcement of the DMA as the first instance in which this regulatory framework has been applied to tech giants. Secondly, it examines how these cases illustrate a broader shift from traditional ex-post antitrust enforcement, which reacts to misconduct, to ex-ante regulatory obligations that aim to prevent unfair practices before they actually materialize. Finally, it explores the wider consequences of DMA enforcement for platform governance, not only within the European Union, but also at a global level, where these decisions are already influencing digital policy debates. In terms of methodology, this research is based on a qualitative legal analysis. It begins by looking closely at the main provisions of the Digital Markets Act, especially the obligations it sets for gatekeepers and how the European Commission enforces them. Then, it analyzed the Apple and Meta cases, examining the Commission's official decisions, press releases, and legal commentary. Finally, this research compares these recent cases with earlier EU competition law precedents, such as fines imposed to Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft also. Through this comparison, the novelty of the DMA is highlighted, particularly its shift towards a preventive and systemic regulatory framework, rather than the traditional reactive antitrust approach. Now let's talk about the legal framework of the DMA and its main characteristics. The DMA targets the largest digital platforms, known as gatekeepers. These are major technology players that provide core platform services, such as online search engines, app stores, and social networks for messaging services. They are identified through some objective criteria, including size, number of users, and overall market impact. Gatekeepers must comply with a series of obligations designed to make digital markets more competitive and innovative. They are required to, for instance, allow interoperability with third-party services, give business users access to the data they generate, provide advertisers with tools for independent verification, and allow businesses to promote and contract with users outside the platform. At the same time, the DMA sets out a list of prohibitions. Gatekeepers may not favor their own products or services in rankings, block links to external businesses, force users to keep pre-installed apps, or track users across different services without their explicit consent. In terms of enforcement, non-compliance can lead to fines, up to 10% of the company's global annual turnover. The Commission may also impose penalty payments of up to 5% of daily turnover, or even require structural remedies, including divestitures in severe cases. Now let's explore the key cases. Uh, let's talk about the Meta case. The Commission found that Meta violated the DMA through its consent or pay advertising model for Facebook and Instagram. The model forced EU users to either consent to data tracking for personalized ads or pay for an ad-free version without offering a free, less data intensive and invasive alternative as required under the DMA. The decision covers the period March-November 2024, before Meta introduced a revised ads model that allegedly uses less personal data. The Commission is still assessing this new, uh, less invasive version. Meta is now, of course, in advanced settlement talks with the Commission to resolve the case and avoid further fines. European officials are optimistic that a workable solution can be reached after earlier proposals were deemed insufficient. The key issue under the discussion is ensuring users can easily find and navigate the available privacy options. In the Apple case, similarly, the European Commission found that Apple breached its obligations under the DMA by restricting app developers from informing users about cheaper or alternative offers outside the App Store. These restrictions limited both developers' ability to promote alternatives and consumers' ability to access them. Apple announced plans in June 2024 to change its App Store policies in response to this EU probe. The company's chief compliance officer stated that Apple acted to avoid the threat of future significant fines. However, Apple has still criticized the EU digital rules, claiming they exceed what the law requires. Now let's talk about the implications of these two cases. These cases help to define how core provisions of the DMA should be interpreted and applied in practice, providing a much needed legal certainty for both regulators and digital platforms. By combining monetary penalties with compliance orders, they establish a clear precedent for future enforcement actions, showing that breaches of the DMA will face both financial and structural consequences. Finally, they signal a move from traditional antitrust investigations, which are reactive and case by case, to a systemic and proactive model for supervising digital gatekeepers. Some relevant cases. Before the adoption of the DMA, the European Union relied mainly on traditional antitrust enforcement to address the growing power of large technology companies. The Microsoft cases in the early 2000s targeted the bundling of Windows Media Player and restrictions on interoperability. The Google investigations that followed focused on self-preferencing practices, favoring Google Shopping results, tying its apps within the Android ecosystem in general, and restricting rival advertisers. Some Apple cases involved App Store policies that limited competition in music streaming and mobile payments, while also Amazon faced scrutiny for using data from independent sellers to benefit its own retail operations in Amazon Marketplace. These cases were handled under uh, Article 102 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, and the enforcement was largely exposed, reacting to the abuses after they occurred. The DMA now represents a major shift towards ex-ante preventive regulation, setting clear obligations for gatekeepers before the harm arises and materializes. To conclude, The enforcement of the DMA marks a decisive moment in the evolution of EU digital regulation. These landmark decisions demonstrate that the European Commission is willing and able to translate the DMA preventive framework into concrete action, moving from reactive antitrust enforcement to proactive market regulation. These cases not only establish important enforcement precedents but also signal a broader structural shift. Ultimately, the Apple and Meta rulings strengthen the credibility of the EU digital strategy. These measures are, of course, criticized by big platforms, but they reaffirm the Union's commitment to fair competition, consumer protection, and data rights in the digital economy, while also consolidating its role as a global standard setter in platform governance. The DMA thus emerges as both a legal and a political instrument, one that reshapes the balance of power in digital markets and lays the foundation for a more open, accountable, and democratic digital ecosystem. Thank you very much.